Have you ever heard a child crying deep in the forest where no one lives for miles? In 1993, I lost my daughter in an accident I'll never forgive myself for. And one late autumn afternoon, in the stillness of Gila National Forest, I heard her cry again. Same rhythm, same breathless sobs. But when I followed the sound, what I found wasn't a ghost, and it wasn't human. Curled beneath an old oak tree was a small, fur-covered creature. Its eyes, wet, black, terrified, looked exactly like my daughter's the last time she scraped her knee and tried not to cry. It was trapped in a rusted steel snare, bleeding and alone. And in that moment, I didn't see a monster. I saw a child. I should have run. I almost did. But instead, I knelt, held out my palms, whispered, "I won't hurt you. Let me help." What happened next changed my life. That child, yes, child, touched my wrist first, like it was testing if I was calm enough to save it. And when I tried to pry open the trap, it pulled my hand out just in time to save me. That wasn't instinct. That was compassion. Then, its mother came, towering, massive, eyes burning gold. And in one moment, I thought, this is where it ends. But she didn't attack. She studied me, smelled the trap, smelled my skin, then pressed her palm to my chest, right over my heart. Not to hurt me, to remember me. They left behind no footprints, just a small bundle of dried grass, leaves, and 2 round balls of earth. A gift. And beneath it, the imprint of a tiny hand. I've never told this story before, but maybe now it's time. Because if you've ever lost someone, if you've ever prayed for one more moment to do the right thing, then maybe this story will mean something to you too. Wherever you're watching from, whether it's a city apartment, a cabin like mine, or halfway across the world, I'd love to know your name and where you're tuning in from. Because maybe, just maybe, this story can reach farther than I ever did. If it touched you even a little, tap that like button and consider subscribing. Together we can build a quiet, kind little corner of the internet. For those of us who still believe in Bigfoot and the better parts of being human. Sending warmth to each of you. See you in the next story. That stretch of trail used to be bright. He remembered that. Not from any photograph or journal, just muscle memory and the color of his daughter's laugh as it rang through the trees like sunlight between branches. But now, in the hush of late afternoon, Graham Whitford walked alone. 42 years old, boots cracked at the toe, jeans gone pale at the knees, a faded flannel shirt hanging loose over his shoulders. A battered canvas backpack creaked faintly as he shifted his weight with each step. The woods were colder than he'd expected, though not yet cruel. Autumn in New Mexico wasn't sharp the way it got up north. It bled slow into winter like a sigh not quite finished. He kept his eyes on the path, not because he was watching for snakes or hidden roots, but because he didn't want to see the place on the right, where Maggie once dropped her stuffed rabbit and cried until he turned back for it. That was before the sound of tires on gravel and sirens, before the phone call that came while he was fixing a fence post 20 miles west, before she was gone, and silence came in her place. Now there was only the crunch of dry leaves underfoot. The wind drifted through oak and pine, carrying the dusty sweetness of dry earth, the faint resin of sap. Somewhere, a jay called once and fell quiet. He inhaled, let the ache tighten in his ribs, then pushed it back down like he always did. And then it came, soft, so soft it almost didn't register. A sound not of the woods, a whimper, faint, restrained. It wasn't the wail of a child looking for attention. It was thinner, compressed, the kind of cry that knew it wasn't safe to be heard. He froze mid-step, heart slamming once against his chest like a warning. His head tilted slightly, listening. Again, barely audible. A trembling inhale, then a tiny sob. It wasn't a coyote. He'd heard enough of them to know their tricksters yip, their midnight screams. This was different. Smaller, closer, and hauntingly familiar. The rhythm of the sobs matched something embedded deep in his bones, the way Maggie used to cry when she had a fever and nightmares, hiccuping, curling into herself. The sound hit him like a nail driven through wood. For a split second, he thought about turning back, just one step away from the sound. Pretend he hadn't heard it. Let it vanish back into the forest like 1,000 other mysteries out here. But he didn't move. His pulse thudded in his ears, louder now than the birds. The air felt denser, like the trees were holding their breath. He clenched his jaw and whispered under it. Not again. He remembered that morning. Coffee half drunk on the counter, toolbox in the truck bed, her sleepy face at the window. He had kissed her forehead and said, "I'll be back before you know it, kiddo." But he hadn't been. Not when it counted. Not when she needed him. Now something else was crying in the woods. Alone. He shifted the backpack off one shoulder, adjusting the strap. Then, deliberately, he left the trail, brushing past scrub oak and ducking under branches. The sound grew no louder, but more insistent, as if it knew someone had heard. His boots sank into soft underbrush, brittle fern, dry needles. The woods thickened, light fading as branches closed in. That's when he saw them. Prints. Small impressions in the soil, half-shadowed beneath leaf litter. Too wide for a child's foot, toes splayed out unnaturally. Bare, deep enough to show weight. But the stride was longer than a toddler's. No accompanying adult prints. No paw marks. He knelt slowly, brushing a palm along one. 5 digits. Human-like, but not human. The toes were too long, the ball of the foot broad. The distance between each step was too uniform, too balanced. He didn't like the way that made his skin prickle. Still, he kept going. The ground dipped, dappled light falling through a gap in the canopy. A fallen log rotted quietly beside an ancient oak with roots curled up from the ground like fingers reaching for air. The sobbing was louder now, but not frantic. Tired, like someone who'd run out of energy to scream. And then he saw it. At first, his breath caught because his heart thought it was her. A small figure huddled beneath the oak's base, back turned, shoulders trembling. The size matched. The way it sat, arms wrapped around knees. For one wild second, his throat clenched and his body surged forward. Then he stopped. The thing was covered in reddish-brown fur, matted in places. The shape of its head was wrong, more rounded at the crown, jaw flatter. Not an animal. Not entirely human. But the sobbing, it sounded exactly like Maggie when she had the flu, curled up on the couch asking if the shadows could touch her. He took a step closer. The creature flinched and turned its head. Big, dark eyes met his. Not reflective. Wet. Deep. They didn't flash like a predator's. They pulled in the light. There was a wire loop around its ankle. Barbed. Rusted. The foot was swollen, blue at the edges. Blood caked where fur met skin, dried in ragged flakes. It looked at him the way a dog does after you've found it hiding under a porch. Fearful, but hoping the person in front of it isn't going to finish the job. "Oh, kid," Graham whispered, his voice cracking. "What did they do to you?" He didn't run. Instead, he did something his body hadn't done in years. He knelt. He let the silence settle again around them. But it wasn't heavy now. It was watching. The trees, the wind, even the leaves seemed to lean in, waiting to see what this man might choose. He slowly lifted both hands, palms out, like approaching a wounded horse. He kept his voice low, steady, barely above breath. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "Easy, easy now." The creature didn't move, but it didn't cry anymore. A minute passed, maybe more. Then, as he inched forward again, it extended one arm, slow, cautious. Its fingers brushed his wrist. He stiffened. The hand was small, covered in fine hair, but the grip was soft. Not testing strength, feeling pulse, just like Maggie used to do. Back when thunder scared her and she'd crawl into his bed, pressing her fingers into his wrist like she could check if he was still real. The trap wasn't complicated. just old and cruel. A rusty wire snare, twisted taut and biting into raw skin. He reached slowly into his pack, withdrawing the pliers he used for fencing. The creature flinched but didn't retreat. "I need to get this off you," he murmured. It didn't understand, but it didn't run. He clamped the wire gently, began twisting. The tension popped suddenly, wire snapping back with a vicious recoil. It nearly caught his hand, but the creature reacted faster than instinct. It tugged his arm away just in time, then let go. He stared. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, you got me." He unwrapped a small first aid kit, tore a packet of alcohol wipes. As he dabbed at the wound, the creature whimpered once, breath catching. He moved slowly, careful not to press too hard. Bandaged the leg, not tight, just enough. Through it all, the creature watched him, watched his breath. Then it began to mirror it. In, out, not in fear, but in rhythm. He sat back, exhausted, heart still unsure what kind of world this was now. The creature, limping slightly, crawled closer. Then it did something no wild thing should. It laid its head on his knee. A sigh escaped it, real, waited. He nearly wept. He reached into his pack, pulled a granola bar, unwrapped it, broke it in half, offered one piece. The creature sniffed it, hesitant, then nibbled. Tiny, deliberate bites. When it finished, it nudged the first aid kit back toward him. A gesture, as if to say, "This is yours, not mine." The sun dipped behind the trees. The cold came in again, not sharp, but present. Still, they sat there, man and something that shouldn't exist, wrapped in golden silence. Graham realized, in a way that didn't need to be said aloud, that he hadn't let anyone lean on him since the day she left. And now something had. He didn't know what would come next. But he knew this much. He wasn't turning his back this time. Not again. Not ever. The last of the daylight was melting into the needles and branches overhead, thinning out into long ribbons of amber that barely reached the forest floor. Graham stayed where he was, one knee on the dirt, one hand steadying himself against the cool earth as the small creature's weight rested lightly against his leg. It breathed in soft, uneven pulses, each one like the tremble of a leaf holding onto its branch in a rising wind. He didn't know how long he had been kneeling there. Minutes, maybe. Could have been an hour. Time in the forest sometimes bent in strange ways, stretching and coiling, especially when something inside you shifted without warning. He didn't speak again. Words felt too loud. He only kept his hands visible and low, letting the little one see he wasn't reaching for anything that could hurt it. A quiet sound came from the creature's throat, somewhere between a hum and a nervous flutter. It wasn't crying anymore, but the fear hadn't left its body. Its shoulders still rose and fell too quickly. When he shifted slightly, the creature flinched. He froze, letting it take the lead. A moment later, its small hand crept toward him again. This time, its fingers brushed along the inside of his wrist with the same gentle precision as before, like it was reading his heartbeat the way a blind hand reads relief in the shape of a familiar object. He felt that touch travel straight through him. It stirred something heavy and old, something he'd buried under years of silence. He swallowed against the ache, exhaling slow enough not to spook it. The creature blinked once, long and deliberate. The movement felt thoughtful, like a gesture from someone who understood more than instinct. He let his gaze drift to the injured leg. The wire had cut deep. A thin ring of dried blood clung to the fur, and the skin beneath looked raw. He reached carefully to retrieve his pliers again, but the creature's fingers tightened around his wrist, stopping him. Its body tensed, breath quickening. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice going fragile at the edges. "Just trying to help." But even as he said it, he knew words weren't enough for something that had learned to trust the world only in small, cautious pieces. So he slowly extended the pliers toward the ground first, laying them there, letting the creature watch, letting it understand there was no hidden strike or sudden harm waiting. Its gaze moved from him to the tool. back to him, then to the trap still biting into its skin. Something flickered in its eyes. Fear, pain, recognition, hope. He didn't know, but something in that tiny face shifted. A soft noise, almost like permission, hummed out of its throat. He lifted the pliers again, very slowly, so slowly it barely counted as motion. When he reached the wire, the creature squeezed its eyes shut and let out a breathy whimper, bracing. He steadied the loop with his free hand. The trap was old and stubborn, the rust making every twist feel like grinding bone. The wire resisted, then groaned, snapping backward with sharp force. The pliers jerked violently in his hand, and the trap's hinge recoiled straight toward his knuckles. He felt the air slice around it, and instinct alone wasn't fast enough. But the creature moved. Its hand flew out, not with panic, but with the clean reflex of something born in the wild. It grabbed his wrist and pulled it safely out of the trap's path before it could crush his fingers. He stared, stunned, as the wire clattered lifelessly into the grass. For a moment, neither of them moved. Not a breath, not a twitch. Then the creature relaxed its grip and retreated half an inch, blinking up at him as if unsure whether it had crossed a line. The gesture was small, but it hit him hard. This wasn't just a wounded animal reacting. Something in it understood danger, understood intention, and somehow understood he needed protecting too. He set the ruined trap aside, pushing it toward the base of the tree with a quiet scrape. The forest around them remained still, as if the trees themselves were taking in what had just happened. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve, then opened his first aid kit again. Alcohol wipes, clean gauze, medical tape. He looked to the creature, letting it see each item before he moved closer. It seemed to understand enough to hold still, though its muscles trembled beneath the matted fur. "Sorry if this stings," he whispered, even though he knew it didn't know the words. The wipe touched the wound, and the creature jerked, releasing a tiny, breathless cry. He paused, letting it breathe, then continued, gentler this time. He cleaned around the raw edges, careful not to pull fur. He wrapped the gauze loosely, not wanting to restrict circulation. It watched his hands the whole time, studying each movement with a focus that felt old, as if watching people tend wounds wasn't entirely new to it. When he finished, he leaned back onto his heels and exhaled. The light around them had dimmed further, washing the clearing in a cool, violet haze. The warmth from earlier was gone. The evening was settling in, weighty and quiet. Then the creature shifted again. It scooted closer, with an awkward, uneven movement because of the injured leg. And without hesitation, as if the fear had softened just enough, it rested its head on his knee again, heavier this time. A full surrender of its small body into the trust forming between them. His breath caught. He didn't touch it, didn't dare. He only let his hand hover near its shoulder, close enough to offer comfort, but not close enough to force contact. The creature's breathing steadied, sinking again with his in a way that felt intentional, in a way that felt like something ancient inside it knew how to read the rise and fall of another chest and match it for safety. He couldn't stop his own chest from tightening. The last time something had leaned on him like this, its hair smelled faintly of strawberry shampoo. That memory hit him so hard it nearly bent him forward. He pushed it down again. The forest didn't need to witness that kind of break in him. Not tonight. Instead, he fished a granola bar out of his backpack. He unwrapped it slowly, letting the soft crinkle of the foil ease into the quiet. He broke it in half and held one piece just within reach. The creature sniffed it, eyes narrowing slightly. Then it took the smallest possible bite, like someone testing a new flavor on the edge of their tongue. It chewed with delicate caution, glancing up at him after each mouthful as if asking silently, "Is this all right?" When it finished, crumbs caught in the fur near its chin. It pushed the empty wrapper and the first aid kit toward him with both hands. Not clumsy, not random, a deliberate offering, returning what wasn't theirs to keep. Something about that gesture felt so deeply familiar that he couldn't breathe for a moment. The light around them fell lower still. Night was drifting down the slopes of the Gila Forest with a steady, creeping insistence, filling the spaces between trees, settling into the hollows of rocks and the quiet pockets of brush. The world was changing shape into something dark and watchful. He knew they couldn't stay here much longer. The forest at night carried its own rules, its own hierarchy, and he wasn't at the top of it. He shifted slightly, but the creature didn't move from his knee. It only lifted its head enough to follow his motion, waiting for some decision he hadn't made yet. He looked toward the fading trail behind him, now little more than a suggestion of a path. "You're okay now," he whispered, "but you gotta go home." The creature didn't understand. Or maybe it did and simply didn't want to. It let out a soft, low sound that vibrated faintly against his leg. Its eyes were wide, dark, and open in a way he recognized too well. Like something afraid of being alone. He felt that fear echo in him. Still, he gently shifted his knee, encouraging it to sit upright on its own. When he rose slowly, the creature's gaze followed him upward, its body tensing again as if worried he might leave too quickly. He didn't walk away. He stood there, keeping his presence calm and steady, allowing it time to adjust to the change in height. The shadows around them thickened. A whisper of cold wind threaded between the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of pine sap and something else heavier. Old bark, stone, the mineral scent of dusk. Up above, the first star trembled through the canopy. He wondered how long before someone, or something, came looking for this little one. He gathered his pack, slung it carefully over one shoulder. The creature watched every movement, its expression shifting constantly. Fear, hope, confusion. It tried to stand, but winced when its weight pressed onto the injured leg. He instinctively reached out, steadying its elbow with a gentle hand. It steadied itself, leaning into his palm for balance. The forest was growing quieter by the second. Too quiet. A hush like this meant something larger was moving through the trees, something the smaller animals didn't want to cross paths with. He felt the pressure of that silence settle like fog against his spine. He needed to move before the night pinned them in place. The creature let go of him reluctantly, easing back down to sit again as though the effort to stand had cost it too much. Its hands rested lightly on the ground, palms down, fingers long and expressive. It blinked slowly and made a soft clicking noise in its throat, small but pleading. He crouched again, lowering himself to eye level. "I can't carry you," he said gently, "but I'm not leaving until you can move." He didn't expect it to understand. It wasn't language he was offering. It was tone, warm, grounded, steady. The creature reached out once more and touched his chest, just above the heart, with the tips of its fingers. The touch was tentative but full of meaning he could not decipher. He didn't push it away. He let his breath stay slow and even, hoping it would mirror him again. The forest dimmed all the way into blue. He felt that familiar inner tug, that sense that something was about to break open, that this quiet moment was only the thin edge of a much larger threshold. He didn't know what waited beyond it, but he could feel the woods shifting around them, as if holding them both in the palm of a single breath. And he knew, with a certainty that hummed beneath his ribs, that he wasn't walking back to the cabin alone tonight. Something was coming. Something that belonged to this small creature the way Maggie had once belonged to him. And whatever stepped through the darkness next would change everything about the man he'd been for the last 6 years. The air thickened. The night pressed in. The forest was no longer quiet by accident. It was quiet because it was listening. And because something else was listening too. By the time Graham noticed the cold creeping back into the forest, it wasn't through his skin first. It came through sound. Or rather, the sudden lack of it. A moment earlier, there had been the faint tick of insects, the whisper of dry leaves dancing on the breeze. But now, even that was gone. No wings fluttered. No chipmunks rustled. No birds called to one another. It was as if the trees themselves had swallowed their breath. He glanced up from where he crouched beside the creature. The light had shifted again. What had been a slow amber dusk was now a thin veil of blue and gray, pulling over the canopy like the first shadow of something enormous leaning in from above. It wasn't yet night. Not officially, but the color had drained from the world in a way that told him the line had been crossed. Somewhere behind the horizon, the sun had let go. The little one was still seated. Its weight shifted slightly off its injured leg. It seemed to notice the change too. Its ears, small and rounded, twitched toward the silence. Its body tensed, every bit of it alive to the hush. Graham slowly rose to one knee, ears straining. The quiet was unnatural. He had spent enough time in these woods to know the difference between calm and warning. This was the kind of silence that settled before a forest fire, the kind that happened just before a mountain lion stepped into a clearing. And it wasn't just what he wasn't hearing. It was what he was starting to feel. A kind of heaviness pushing down from above, as if something large was near. Moving carefully, he shifted his weight. The small creature looked up at him, wide-eyed. Its fur bristled in places, not just from cold. Graham turned his head, slowly. That's when he heard it. Not loud, just faint enough to doubt his own ears. A single step, leaves compressed under weight. No snap, no stumble, but not careless, just deliberate. One, then another. Slow enough to betray patience, heavy enough to suggest size. Whatever it was knew how to move, but it wasn't trying to be completely silent. He took a breath through his nose, slow and shallow. No smell. Not yet. But the temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees in the last minute. His breath didn't fog yet, but it felt tight in his lungs. The thought came fast and uninvited. No one knows where I am. No wife to check in. No neighbors. He hadn't told the diner folks he was heading up the trail today. Just another day with his tools and the sound of his boots. If something happened to him out here, it could be weeks before anyone started asking. And that thought peeled open something deeper, something cruel and sharp. Maggie had died alone. He wasn't there. He was supposed to pick her up from a friend's, but got called out for a job last minute. A busted fence, 2 hours away. When he got back to the phone signal, the voice on the other end wasn't even his ex-wife's. It was someone from the hospital. He hadn't even heard the accident happened. Just the cold rundown. Car, truck, rain, critical. Too late. He hadn't protected her. And now, if he turned back down this trail, left this creature behind, whatever was out there could finish what it started. And it wouldn't be her this time. It would be someone else's daughter, someone else's kin. Or maybe this thing wasn't someone's anything. But still, it had trusted him. It had saved his hand from that trap, had leaned into him when it was afraid. He clenched his jaw. This wasn't a moment to be brave. It was a moment to be honest. And the truth was, if he turned away now, he'd never forgive himself again. He looked down at the creature. Its eyes were locked toward the trees, unblinking. Then it let out a sound, soft and high-pitched, like the chirp of a bird, but clearer, more intentional. Not a cry, a signal. It pointed, not with alarm, but with awareness. Graham followed its gaze. At first he didn't see it. Then his eyes adjusted to the darkness between the trees. And something shifted. A patch of dark moved where dark shouldn't move. Between two tall pines, a shape began to separate from the shadows. No sound accompanied it. Not a twig broke. Not a leaf fell. Then he saw the eyes, low to the ground. Then they rose, yellow, reflective, but not glowing. Eyes that seemed to take in more than they gave back. The figure stepped forward, massive, 8 feet tall, maybe more. Shoulders broad enough to fill a door frame. The fur was darker than the little one's, less red, more black with deep, earthy tones. Its arms hung long at its sides, knuckles near knees. but it didn't move like something hunched or ape-like. It stood upright, fluid, alert. Its face wasn't human, but it wasn't an animal's either. No snout, no jutting brow. The features were deep, angular, shadowed. And the eyes, those weren't predator eyes. They weren't mindless. They were watching him, calculating. Graham's spine locked. Every instinct in him screamed to run, but the small hand at his side gripped his pants. Tugged, trembling. He looked down. The creature's expression had shifted. Not terror, but warning. And something more. Pleading. He turned back. The figure stepped closer. Still far enough away to leave space, but close enough now that Graham could see the shift of muscle under fur, the rise and fall of its massive chest. Its presence made the earth feel tighter, like space had compressed to fit it. Graham stood slowly, putting himself between the creature and the approaching figure. Not out of strategy, just reflex. He didn't know what this was. He didn't know what she was. But somehow, he knew. This wasn't a threat in the way a bear was a threat. This was something older, more rooted in these woods than the trails or the names humans gave to peaks and rivers. And she was here for her child. The thought struck like a bell. This was the mother. He could feel it in the weight of her stare. Not fury, not yet, but power held back only by restraint. He raised both hands slowly. Not as surrender, but acknowledgement. "I helped," he said, knowing the words didn't matter. But maybe the tone did. Her chest rose, then fell. A sound left her mouth, low, almost vibrational. It hummed through the trunks of the trees and settled into the marrow of his bones. Then she took another step. The ground beneath him felt it. And then another. She was close now. He didn't move. She looked down at him, then past him, at the small one behind his legs, then back to him. She exhaled. A deep, guttural sound, like stone dragged across stone, but not menacing. More inquisitive. Then he heard it again, a step behind her, or something further out in the woods. The mother didn't look back. She just stayed still, watching. Graham felt his throat dry out. His heart thudded. But somehow, in the quiet, he found himself calm. He didn't reach for anything. Didn't back away. He just stayed, between. The little one pressed into the back of his calf. A sound, a chirp, then another, short and urgent, rose up from behind him. The mother shifted slightly. Her expression changed. Less guarded. Still fierce, but something new slid in behind it. Consideration, judgment. He realized then that he wasn't being seen as prey. He was being assessed. His breath caught. This wasn't survival. This was a trial. And the forest around them was holding its breath to hear the verdict. She took one final step. He did not flinch. And then, with the same silence she had emerged with, she stopped. No claws raised, no charge. Only eyes holding his, and in them, not hatred, not even warning. Just a message. We see you. We remember. Then, without a word, without a growl, she waited. And Graham knew. Whatever happened next wasn't up to him anymore. The forest had hurt his heart. Now it was waiting to see what kind of man he truly was. She stepped forward again. The ground didn't tremble, not in the way stories might claim. But Graham felt it all the same, not through the soles of his boots, but in his chest, the way your ribs tighten when thunder rolls in too low to hear. She was taller than he'd realized in the shadows. Not just tall, but built like the forest itself, dense, old, solid. Her silhouette was shaped by gravity, by time, by survival. Wide at the shoulders, tapering not into fragility, but function. She moved like weight had meaning, like every step held a history she could hurl at you if she chose. She stopped just a few paces away. The moonlight filtered in broken patches through the canopy above, catching in the curve of her shoulders, glinting off the rough texture of the fur that covered her. Her chest rose and fell slowly, each breath steady and audible in the sudden stillness. The scent of her hit Graham like a rush of wet moss. dry pine, damp stone, and something else beneath it. An animal note, but not foul, not rotting, just real. Her eyes were on him, yellow, wide-set, and utterly still. Not feral, not blind with rage, but alert, piercing. Graham didn't move, not an inch. Behind him, the little one had gone still again, crouched low. Graham could feel the tiny hand gripping the fabric near his knee, not begging him to protect it, just anchoring itself to the only constant left in the moment. Him. The mother blinked once. Then a sound rose from her chest, not a roar. Not the kind of sound you'd expect from something that large. It was deeper than that. A growl that didn't tear out of her but pressed into the air like a question made of thunder. It vibrated, not just in the air, but in the marrow of his bones. Graham felt it reach straight through his chest and out his back. It wasn't loud. It was low. The kind of sound you don't hear with your ears, but you remember long after your heart slows down again. Then she moved. One arm, massive and furred, lifted, not toward him, but to the side. And then she brought it down. The strike landed against the trunk of a tree barely 3 feet to his left. Bark exploded in splinters. The entire side of the trunk cracked open like a snapped rib cage. The sound shattered through the clearing like gunfire muffled in snow. A shard of wood sliced across Graham's cheek. He didn't flinch, didn't lift a hand. He just stood there, bleeding, eyes open, taking her in. She could have hit him. She didn't. That wasn't an attack. That was a warning, a test, a line drawn without words. Behind him, the little one made a sound. A chirp, higher and frantic. Then a softer noise, like a plea. It pointed again, at its foot. At the wire still curled like a dead snake beside the roots. At Graham, then back to her. She shifted. Her breathing changed. The tone that came out of her next wasn't the same low growl. It was something else. Not quite speech, but close. Tones drawn out longer. A rhythm. Like one side of an argument you can only hear half of. It held weight. Expectation. The child responded. Shorter sounds. Clipped. Desperate maybe, fast, not panicked, just urgent. They were talking. Not like humans, but not like animals either. And Graham, man of fences, of coffee left half warm on the stove, of forgotten birthdays and too late apologies, stood in the middle of a debate that felt older than the road he'd walked in on. She looked at him again, this time not like a threat, like a judge. She crouched lower, knees bending in a way that looked far too graceful for something that size. She pressed her palm to the ground. Then she leaned forward, and she sniffed. Not the air, the trap. Then the blood on her child's leg. Then him. She moved toward him. So close now he could see the thick calluses on her fingers, the flecks of sap clinging to the long strands of fur near her wrist. She extended one massive hand and brought it near his arm. Graham's lungs went still. She sniffed, wrist to elbow, her breath hot, damp. No gunpowder, no meat, no blood not his own. She sniffed again, her face barely a foot from his now. Then she pulled back, and her eyes changed. Still sharp, still wild, but the heat in them, the fire that might have wanted him gone, softened into something harder to define. Recognition, maybe. The silence between them stretched, and then something inside Graham cracked. Not with fear, not from pain, from memory. He saw Maggie, not in the hospital bed, not in the photograph on the fridge, but laughing. That warm September day she'd run barefoot through the yard with a popsicle melting down her hand and a headband askew in her hair, singing nonsense songs to a beat only she could hear. He hadn't thought of that day in years. His knees nearly gave. He whispered, not to her, not to the creature before him, but to the child who'd left the world before he could say goodbye. I'm sorry, kiddo. His voice broke on the last word. I'm trying to do it right this time. He didn't expect the creature to understand the words. But she tilted her head slightly, as if she caught the tone, the rhythm, the ache behind it, and something shifted between them. The child pressed its hand to Graham's back. She didn't strike, didn't roar. She looked into his face for a breath longer. and something inside her decision passed like a silent verdict. But the final gesture hadn't come. Not yet. Because the forest hadn't let go of them. Not yet. She hadn't moved for a long time. Not in the way most would notice. But Graham felt it. In the shift of her weight. The slight lowering of her shoulders. The way her breath came not as a warning, but as presence. The kind that meant she'd made her choice. Not to attack. Not to retreat. But to let the next moment speak for itself. Her massive hand lifted again. Not fast. No tension in the motion. She didn't raise it to strike. She extended it forward, steady, deliberate, and placed it against his chest, right over his heart. Not with force, no shove, no threat, just pressure, warmth, size. She kept it there for a second. Maybe two. And though her palms spanned nearly from shoulder to shoulder, the weight wasn't crushing. It was grounding. She wasn't testing him now. She was remembering him, marking him. And Graham understood, maybe not in words, but in some old corner of his bones, that she wasn't just touching his body. She was memorizing it, his scent, his pulse, his heat. Not as a gift, but as a warning etched in silence. He didn't breathe. He didn't need to. She knew him now. And if he ever crossed a line again, she'd remember the way his heart beat under her hand. She'd remember the smell of fear and mercy wrapped in one. Then she pulled back. No sound left her mouth. No more guttural tones. She stepped to the side, turning just slightly, and lowered her arm toward the ground. Her hand opened wide. Then she let the edge of one thick, dark nail press into the earth. She dragged it slowly. Graham watched the dirt shift. Watched the cold ground part under her touch. A single line carved with quiet intention. It ran long and straight, running parallel to the trail behind him. A trail that humans used. A trail Graham had walked so many times he no longer noticed the footprints. But now this line, cut beside it like a second spine, a second law. She didn't look at him when she stood. She didn't need to. He understood. That line was not a boundary of space. It was a warning of behavior. It said, this far is yours, that far is not. It wasn't just about the physical forest, it was about the knowing of it, the claiming of what should be left untouched. He nodded. Not to show agreement, but respect. A movement to his right broke the stillness. The small one had stepped forward, still limping but moving better now. It approached the line its mother had drawn. Stared down at it, head tilting slightly. Then it crouched. Its fingers weren't large enough to leave the same depth in the soil, but they were precise, intentional. It drew a second line, smaller, slightly askew, not perfectly straight. And unlike its mother's, this one leaned just a little toward Graham's side of the clearing. It wasn't rebellion. It was curiosity. A question posed in dirt. A child's voice asking, just with gesture, if maybe one day the space between yours and mine didn't have to be so wide. Graham swallowed, the mother noticed. She didn't correct the child. She didn't stop it. But when the child looked back up at her, she raised her hand again. Not in anger, not in command, but to bring it close, to call it near. It obeyed immediately. She leaned down, arms out, and scooped it up with emotion that startled Graham not for its power, but for its tenderness. She cradled the injured leg against her side, keeping it elevated so it wouldn't drag. Her head bowed slightly, her cheek brushing gently against the child's crown. A motion so impossibly human that it made Graham's throat close. The child looked over her shoulder one last time. Not afraid, not desperate, just present. It raised one hand, not high, not waving, just extending it, open, toward Graham. Not touching, just offering. Then it let its arm fall again and turned inward, curling into its mother's chest. She didn't linger. She turned. Her back was broad, layered with fur that caught the blue sheen of moonlight in small patterns, like moss under rain. And as she walked away, the air didn't lighten. It stayed dense. Alive, not with danger, but with meaning. Her steps made almost no sound. Her sighs should have shattered branches, cracked twigs, rustled leaves. But the forest welcomed her back in like water welcomes stone. And then, slowly, so slowly it could have been a trick of the mind, the night sounds returned. A single insect buzzed in the distance. A breeze stirred the ferns. The trees breathed again, and Graham was left standing beside two lines in the dirt. He looked down at them. His boots were just inches away. The longer line, deep, clean, sharp. The second one lighter, a little crooked, but real. He felt the place on his chest where her hand had rested. The heat still there. Like a brand, only not of punishment. A memory, a vow, a debt, maybe. One that didn't come with terms, but came with expectation. He took a step back, not out of fear, out of reverence. He didn't cross the lines. He just let them be. He turned slowly, retracing his path back toward the trail. It felt different now. Not narrower, not shorter, just changed. Like he no longer owned his solitude the way he used to. By the time he reached the place where the forest opened into the wider path, his breath had settled. His hands had stopped trembling. But when he paused to look up at the stars, barely visible through the trees, he didn't see the same night sky he'd left behind hours earlier. He saw a sky that now held witnesses, a sky that now remembered. He reached into his shirt pocket and touched the corner of a granola wrapper, still folded there. The one from earlier. The one the child had nudged back toward him. He didn't throw it away. He didn't need to know why. He just knew it mattered now. Everything did. Every footprint. Every snapped twig. Every careless hand left open near the edge of a trap. And when he walked the rest of the way back to his cabin, he didn't walk fast. He walked like someone who'd just been entrusted with a secret he didn't ask for, but would carry anyway. Because not every weight is meant to be laid down. Some you carry because silence is the only way to keep them safe. The walk back to the cabin felt longer than it should have, as if each tree he passed watched him differently now. Not with suspicion, but with memory. The air still carried the cool bite of early night, and though the forest had eased out of its silence, the sounds returned in small, cautious ways. A cricket here. A flutter of wings there, a rustle of dry leaves shifting somewhere along the slope. The world was reassembling itself after holding its breath. Graham carried that feeling with him, like a weight in his chest he didn't want to drop. When he reached his cabin, the small windows glowed faintly from the lantern he'd left burning earlier, a soft amber pool waiting for him. The sight should have comforted him. Instead, it made him pause on the steps. He touched the railing with a hand that still felt the warmth from the creature's mother, the imprint of something too large and too ancient for him to name. Inside, he set his tools near the door and hung his jacket on the back of a chair. He washed the dirt from his hands in the small basin, watching the water swirl into darker shades before settling into stillness. When he lifted his head, he caught sight of himself in the mirror above the basin. The scratch on his cheek from the shattered bark was longer than he'd thought. A thin line of dried blood trailed down past his jaw. He didn't wipe it away. He just stared at the reflection. The tired eyes, the unshaven jaw. The man who hadn't forgiven himself for 6 long years. The man who went into the woods today without expecting anything more than a quiet walk, a distraction from the ache he kept trying to outrun. He reached up and touched the mark on his cheek. It stung. Not much. Just enough to remind him it was real. He moved away from the mirror and sat by the wood stove. He didn't light it yet. He just listened to the quiet inside the cabin. A different quiet from the forest's, warmer but lonelier. His hand drifted toward his chest again, to the place where that massive palm had rested. The memory of that touch wasn't heavy. It was grounding. Like someone placing a weight on your shoulders, not to burden you, but to anchor you before you drift too far. He leaned back and closed his eyes. There had been a moment tonight, just a flicker, when he thought he'd felt something like purpose again. Not redemption, not absolution, just purpose. Something to hold that didn't break him. Something he could protect, even if just for a heartbeat. It frightened him a little. How quickly that feeling had found him again after so many years of numbness. He didn't know how long he sat there before he finally lit the stove. The fire caught slowly, flames licking the wood like a memory reigniting itself. He let the warmth seep into his bones. He didn't sleep. Not really. Just drifted in and out of a soft, restless doze that felt more like standing on the edge of a dream than falling into one. Sometime past midnight, he finally lay down. His mind didn't quiet, but his body needed the rest. The forest outside seemed calm. Normal, but normal no longer meant what it used to. When the dawn came, it slipped into the cabin in a muted wash of gray, cool and thin like water poured lightly over stone. He rubbed his face with both hands and sat up, his joints stiff from sleeping in the wrong position. He poured a cup of coffee, black and too hot, and took a slow sip while looking out the window. The woods waited, not calling him, not warning him, just waiting. He set the mug down and grabbed his jacket. He had to go back. He didn't tell himself why. He didn't say it was to check for tracks, or to reassure himself it hadn't been some strange dream, or to gather the old trap so no one else could use it. He didn't need a reason. His feet found the path on their own. The sky was overcast now, clouds stretching across the horizon like pulled wool. The morning air carried the scent of wet leaves, though nothing had rained. As he reached the clearing, he slowed. The forest felt different than last night, but not safer, just quieter in a gentler way. He stepped toward the place by the oak where everything had happened, where he'd knelt, where the child had cried. The ground was disturbed, but not by struggle. The leaves were moved, shifted, smoothed over, deliberately, as if someone or something had walked through after he left and erased any sign of their presence. The trap was gone, not broken, not rusting on the ground, gone entirely. He crouched, his fingers brushed the dirt. Someone cleaned this place. Someone who knew the value of secrecy. His breath steadied, but his heart started beating faster. He scanned the ground carefully, expecting nothing else. But something caught his eye. A bundle, right where he'd knelt last night. Small, neat. He reached for it slowly. Grass stalks bound together. Not tied with string, but twisted in a pattern that felt practiced. Delicate leaves woven through the center. 2 small clumps of packed earth, rounded like someone shaped them with care, sat beneath the grass like weights keeping it from blowing away. It wasn't random. It wasn't debris. It was placed there. His fingers hovered over it. For a second, he hesitated. He didn't know if touching it would break whatever quiet ritual it represented. But leaving it untouched felt wrong, too, like ignoring a gesture meant for him. He picked it up. The bundle was lighter than he expected. The grass dry but not brittle, as if chosen from a patch still clinging to the last warmth of fall. The leaves faintly fragrant. The earth spheres smooth enough to show intention. He turned it in his hands, trying to understand. It wasn't a lure, not a threat, not something careless. It wasn't food. It wasn't a tool. It was a gift, or an acknowledgement, or both. When he lifted the bundle, he saw the shape beneath it, a small handprint pressed into the soil. Not human, but small. The fingers longer than a child's, the palm shallow. The shape unmistakable. He inhaled sharply, his hand lowered, instinctively pressing his fingers next to the print. His palm nearly matched its size. His daughter's hand at 6 years old had fit almost exactly that way with his own. Tiny but determined, warm but fragile. His throat tightened without warning. He stayed crouched like that for a long time, staring at the handprint until the edges began to blur. Not because the earth shifted, because his eyes did. He blinked them clear and wiped his face with the back of his sleeve. He took the bundle into both hands and stood again, not as a trophy, not as a keepsake, but as a promise. He didn't know what kind. Not yet. But something inside him understood this was not some wild creature's random gesture. This was an answer to last night. A silent line extended between them, not like the one the mother had carved into the earth to establish distance, but one the child had drawn instead. This one wasn't a warning. This was connection. He held the bundle carefully, as if it were something fragile. Not precious, but meaningful. The forest around him felt open again, full of small sounds and shifting light. A bird called from somewhere deeper in the trees. A distant breeze whispered through the pines. He didn't speak, but something in him softened. He walked back to the cabin slowly, sensing eyes on him though he didn't see them. Not stalking, just watching. Making sure he returned safely, or making sure he didn't cross the wrong path on the way home. Inside the cabin, he placed the grass bundle on the shelf by the window. The same place he kept the mismatched objects he never quite threw away. Old photographs, tools inherited from his father. Maggie's last drawing folded into an envelope he couldn't open anymore. The bundle fit there, quietly, honestly. He stepped back, hands on his hips, breath pulling slow and steady. It wasn't just decoration, it was responsibility, and he felt it. Not heavy, but real. He didn't know what would happen now. He only knew that the forest knew him, and he knew it back. And the promise between them wasn't in words, just action and silence, and the memory of 2 lines drawn in the dirt. That night, as he sat with the fire crackling low and the night settling around the cabin, he thought he heard something in the distance. Soft, gentle, a footfall too light for a human, too deliberate for an animal. He didn't stand. He didn't reach for the window. He just listened. Because sometimes the forest doesn't ask you to respond. Sometimes it only asks you to hear it. And he did. The days passed without fanfare. Graham didn't tell anyone. He didn't mention the grass bundle sitting on his window ledge. Didn't try to explain why he'd stopped keeping the radio on, or why he started walking the perimeter of his property each morning before the coffee was even brewed. He still chopped wood. Still cooked simple meals. Still made small repairs to the fence out back, even though no one but the wind ever pushed against it. But something had shifted. He could feel it in the way he moved through the cabin. Not faster, not lighter. Just different. Like he'd been carrying weight for so long that when it lessened, even slightly, he didn't know how to stand without leaning forward anymore. The nights felt longer, but not lonelier. He'd sit on the porch long after the sun dropped below the trees, eyes fixed on the tree line, not expecting anything, just watching, listening. The air had changed, the kind of cold that didn't sting, but wrapped around your knuckles like a reminder. The leaves had lost their color, faded now into brittle shapes that crunched under boot soles even when you tried to step soft. The nights came earlier, the shadows stretched wider, and the forest, though quiet, no longer felt indifferent. It felt aware. And Graham, who once lived among trees as if they were scenery, not witness, now carried every rustle and breeze like a conversation. Then, one night near the end of fall, it happened. The stars were clear. Not a single cloud above. The moon hung back, waiting for its turn, and the cold had deepened just enough to make the boards of the cabin creak like an old man shifting in his sleep. Graham had just put out the lantern when he heard it. A footstep, then another. Not loud, not fast, but intentional. Soft enough not to be threatening, close enough to be felt. He didn't move. He let his eyes adjust to the dark, stepping out onto the porch, the screen door sighing behind him. The cold hit his skin like the breath of something watching, but he welcomed it. And there they were, just past the tree line, about 20 yards out. 2 shapes stood in silence. He recognized the taller one instantly. The mother. Her height hadn't changed. Neither had the way she stood. Shoulders strong, posture proud, still as bark. But beside her now, standing upright on its own, was the smaller one, the child. No longer curled against her chest, no longer held. It stood on its own 2 feet, a little uneven from the healed wound, but balanced enough to hold its space. And Graham, he didn't speak, he didn't wave, he didn't walk forward. He simply remained on the porch. His breath hung in the air in front of him like a small cloud waiting for an answer. The mother lowered herself slightly, her arms lifted. She placed the child gently onto the ground. She didn't nudge it, didn't push it forward. She simply let go. And the child, fur now fuller with the cold, posture more upright, began to walk. One step, then another. Graham felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with something else, something older. The child stopped a dozen feet from the porch. Close, but not too close. Its eyes lifted. Graham could see them now. Even in the dark. That same deep black that didn't reflect so much as absorb. Like wells of silence, it made a sound. Not loud, not strange, just soft. A syllable without words. Like a greeting that had no language attached. He didn't answer, not with sound. But he stepped down one stair. Not fully into the yard, not toward it. Just down, lower, at its level. And the child tilted its head. Then it did something he didn't expect. It lifted one hand, pressed it lightly to its own chest, then reached that same hand outward, palm open. The gesture mirrored the one its mother had made. But there was something gentler in this, something hopeful. Graham didn't move. He didn't break the line between them. But his hand lifted, slow, honest, and mirrored the motion. His palm to his own chest, then outward, open. Still no words. Just air between them. The child's shoulders dropped slightly, in what looked almost like relief. Then a sound came from behind, from deeper in the trees. Not sharp, not angry, just low. Calling, not for him, for her. The mother. She didn't hesitate. Her body turned, just slightly, but her eyes stayed fixed on Graham a second longer. Her gaze now wasn't evaluating. It was something closer to remembrance, or warning, or both. Then she stepped back. The child looked once more at Graham, then turned, small shoulders rising with a breath it didn't know it was holding, and placed one hand, deliberate, soft, on the tree trunk closest to it. Then followed her into the dark. Neither of them looked back again, and Graham didn't follow. He stood there long after the forest swallowed them again. The stars above unchanged. The night quiet, except for the distant creak of a branch. He breathed slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth. And when he turned to go inside, the cold followed him in like a silent echo of what just passed. He didn't sleep for a long time, not because he was restless, because he didn't want the feeling to fade. That quiet exchange, that moment when nothing was said, but everything was heard. And even after he closed the door, and the warmth of the stove began to chase the chill from the room, he looked once more toward the window, half expecting to see a small hand pressed against the glass. But there was nothing, just the wind, and the knowing, that for the first time since the day he lost Maggie, something had come back to him. Not to stay, not to fix, just to be, even for a moment. Jack didn't sleep that night, not really. He sat by the wood stove long after the last embers should have dimmed, staring into a fire that felt like it came from some older world. Older than Oak Ridge, older than the pines, older than men like him who carried too many questions. The cabin was still, but not quiet. The forest outside shifted like it was breathing. Ruth's photo on the shelf seemed to watch him, her smile softened by the flicker of flame, and he whispered to it once, maybe twice, like a man asking permission. By dawn, he'd already packed a small rucksack with jerky, water, the old compass he hadn't touched in years, and the worn leather journal wrapped in flannel, the one he found in the floorboard last week. He waited till the sun melted frost off the pine needles, till the birds stopped arguing, till everything held its breath again. Then he stepped off the porch like a man crossing back into something he'd once promised to leave alone. But this time he wasn't going alone. Nora had already laced up her boots. She stood by the tree line, arms crossed, jacket zipped, her face set in that quiet defiance that reminded him of Ruth when she'd say, "I'm going with you and that's final." And Jack, just like back then, didn't argue. They walked together in silence at first. The path behind the cabin twisted through fir and cedar like a half-remembered song, one Jack knew by heart but hadn't sung in years. It was the one he'd taken back when the forest was still speaking to him in dreams, when he used to think certain places could remember kindness. Nora didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She followed his pace, always a step behind, but never lost. Like she was meant to be there. They reached the clearing by mid-morning. The air felt expectant. No wind, but the trees leaned ever so slightly inward, like they were watching. Jack slowed near the old stone circle, the same one he'd cleared decades ago after that first encounter, after that winter when the snow fell too early and one young creature wandered too far. The circle was different now, not overgrown, not abandoned, just cared for in a way no human hand could have done. New stones had been added. Moss grew in deliberate lines, and in the center, laid gently on a bed of pine needles, was a small bundle wrapped in deer hide. Jack didn't speak. He just knelt beside it and unwrapped the bundle like it might vanish if he moved too fast. Inside was a pendant, a locket, dull with time but unmistakable. Ruth's. The one she'd worn every day until it went missing 3 years before she passed. Jack's breath caught, and Nora crouched beside him without a word, her eyes locked on his, but she wasn't looking at the locket. She was looking past him, and then Jack heard it too, not footsteps, not rustling. More like the shifting of weight in air itself, a presence that didn't belong to deer or bear or wind. He turned slowly, heart pounding not with fear, but with something sharper. Something he hadn't let himself feel since the day he'd told Ruth, "They won't come back, it's over." But it wasn't over, not even close. Standing at the edge of the clearing, half shadowed by cedar branches, was the figure from the past. Taller now, scar over the left brow, chest broader, eyes still the same. It was the young one. The same creature Jack had once carried in his arms, bloodied and trembling, back to its mother on a snow-blind evening in 1986. But now he wasn't young. He was a guardian. Behind him, half shrouded in brush, were 3 others. 2 smaller, one larger with streaks of silver in her fur, and an unmistakable stillness, like a matriarch holding the silence of centuries in her breath. No one moved. Not even the birds dared interrupt. It was the kind of moment no photograph could hold. The kind of truth that didn't need to be proven. It just was. Nora stepped forward before Jack could stop her. Slow, steady, her palms open. Her voice soft like wind through grass. "Thank you." That was all she said. But something shifted in the air. The guardian, because that's what he was now, not a boy, not a creature, lowered his gaze slightly, a gesture of recognition. Maybe respect, maybe something deeper. He stepped forward, just once, then knelt and with surprising care placed a bundle of long twisted grass at the base of the stone circle. A braid, woven with pine needles and something that shimmered faintly in the light. It was a gift, a reply. Jack felt tears burn, uninvited. The last time he'd seen that kind of braid was years ago, after Ruth's funeral, tucked on the cabin step with 3 pine cones and a smooth river stone. He hadn't understood it then, but he did now. It was their way of saying, "We remember." They stood there, 2 humans and 4 forest kin, not speaking, not reaching, just being, like an understanding passed in stillness, like an old promise being kept. Then, one by one, the forest kin turned and vanished into the trees, not hurried, not afraid. Just gone, like mist pulling back from the ground. But Jack and Nora didn't leave. Not yet. They sat by the stone circle until the light began to bend gold through the canopy. Jack opened the journal again. The last page held a note he hadn't seen before, written in Ruth's hand. Faded, but clear. "If they ever return, don't be afraid. Let kindness finish what it started." He smiled. Not the wide kind. the quiet, broken kind that healed something old in the chest. Nora didn't say anything. She just leaned her head on his shoulder. And for the first time in years, Jack felt the forest settle around him like it was welcoming him home. By the time they returned to the cabin, stars were blinking on, and smoke from the chimney stretched into a navy sky. Jack built a fire. Nora made tea. Neither of them turned on the radio. The world outside didn't need explaining tonight. They sat with the door open, listening, waiting. Not for a sound, but for a feeling. The one that comes when you know the story isn't ending. It's beginning again. The next morning, Jack rose before dawn. He moved slow, deliberate, like a man closing a circle. He packed a small wooden box. Inside, Ruth's locket, a hand-carved figurine she once made, and the sketch Nora had drawn of the guardian. He left it at the base of the old cedar behind the cabin. No note, no markings, just the offering. Then he walked back inside and started breakfast. Because that's what you do when something sacred visits you. You honor it. Then you go on living. But every now and then, when the wind bends the trees just so, and the dusk settles thicker than it should, Jack pauses at the door. And some part of him, old, tired, wiser, knows he's not alone. Not really, because kindness never vanishes in these woods. It just circles back, quiet as snow, waiting to be answered. Sometimes, the quietest places hold the loudest truths. Deep in the woods, where cell signals fade and the world forgets your name, something ancient still waits. Not to be discovered or tamed, but to be understood. And maybe that's what we've lost in all our rushing around. Not just the stillness, but the willingness to listen to something we can't explain. Because there are stories in this world that don't fit in textbooks or headlines. They don't come with proof or polished endings. They come like wind through the trees, unexpected, undeniable, and full of meaning if we're brave enough to sit still and feel them. And when we do, we start to see with our hearts again, not just our eyes. What if kindness wasn't just a good deed, but a language? One older than words. One spoken through gestures, through silence, through the way we care for what can't ask for it out loud. What if the greatest bridges are built not by power, but by patience? By choosing not to fear what we don't understand. By recognizing that even the unfamiliar has a soul. And maybe that's the quiet truth of this story. That the forest doesn't need us to conquer it. It asks only for respect, for reverence, for the kind of humility that says, I see you, and I choose not to harm you. In a world so quick to tear down what's different, there's something radical in choosing to protect, to nurture, to remember that not all wild things are threats, and not all who vanish are gone. Some truths are passed down not in facts, but in feelings. In the way our hands tremble when we know something sacred has brushed past us. In the way we look back at a certain place in the woods and feel, without knowing why, that we should nod before we leave. That's not superstition. That's remembrance. That's legacy. You don't have to believe in everything to believe in something. And maybe, just maybe, believing in something gentle, something wild, something watching from the tree line, changes the way we walk through the world. A little slower, a little kinder, a little more aware that we are never quite as alone as we think. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you feel seen, or made you remember someone you miss, or even just gave you a moment to breathe, then let it stay with you. Carry it gently. Share it with someone who needs a little wonder in their day. And if you have a story of your own, something strange or beautiful that you've held on to in silence, we'd love to hear it. Leave us a comment. Let us know where in the world you're listening from. And if this kind of story feels like home to you, please consider subscribing and joining this growing family of kind hearts and open minds. Because out here, the more we share, the more the forest seems to answer back. Thank you for walking with us. See you on the trail.